It weighs less than a refrigerator. It needs no license, no registration, no medical certificate. And in September of 2019, it became the final flight of a 9-time NASCAR champion. This is the Aerolite 103, a machine so simple it barely qualifies as an airplane under federal law, yet powerful enough to kill the men who trust it. Today, we are pulling apart the design, the engineering compromises, and the pattern of NTSB investigations that follow this aircraft wherever it flies. If you care about the real story behind general aviation, not the glossy brochure version, hit subscribe right now, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why an aircraft this simple keeps producing accidents this serious. A designer's answer to a regulatory loophole. To understand the Aerolite 103, you first have to understand the rule it was built around. Federal Aviation Regulation Part 103 is one of the strangest corners of American aviation law. It defines a category called the ultralight vehicle, technically not even classified as an aircraft in the eyes of the FAA. If a single-seat flying machine weighs less than 254 pounds empty, carries no more than 5 gallons of fuel, and cannot exceed 63 miles per hour in level flight, the pilot needs no license, no medical exam, no registration number, and no formal training. You can build one, fuel it up, and fly it the same afternoon. In 1997, a designer named Terry Raber set out to build the best possible aircraft inside that narrow legal box. Raber was not new to ultralights. He had already built aircraft under the CGS Hawk kit line and worked as an assembler for Quicksilver, one of the pioneering ultralight manufacturers of the 1980s. What he wanted with his own design was something that felt more like a real airplane than the fabric and tube contraptions that had defined the category for 2 decades. Working out of Millansburg, Ohio, under the company name AeroWorks Aerolite, Raber introduced the Aerolite 103. It found an audience almost immediately. The aircraft began winning awards on the airshow circuit: Grand Champion Ultralight, Best Commercial Design, Reserve Grand Champion, at events like Sun and Fun and EAA AirVenture in Oshkosh. Between 1997 and 2012, Raber's company produced hundreds of these aircraft, by some estimates between 300 and 400 flying examples. AeroWorks itself shut down in 2005, but Raber kept building the design independently for several more years. In 2012, Raber decided to step away from aviation manufacturing altogether. He sold the design and tooling to Dennis Carley, a former Challenger ultralight build shop operator with 2 decades of construction experience across more than 100 aircraft. Carley relocated production to DeLand, Florida, under the name You Fly It Light Sport Aircraft, and by the mid-2020s, the company was producing 50 to 60 units a year, pushing the total Aerolite fleet toward the 1,000 aircraft mark. For a Part 103 ultralight, a category most manufacturers treat as a niche hobby product, that is a remarkable production run.
The engineering of staying legal. What makes the Aerolite 103 worth studying is not just that it exists, but how it was engineered to exist. Every decision on this airframe was shaped by one number: 254 pounds. The airframe is built from bolted and riveted aluminum tube covered in Dacron sailcloth rather than aluminum skin, a direct weight-saving choice borrowed from hang glider and paraglider technology. It is a high-wing, pusher configuration design, meaning the engine and propeller sit behind the pilot rather than in front, a layout that keeps the pilot's forward view unobstructed and simplifies the airframe structure. The wing itself uses half-span flaps, extendable up to 40 degrees through an overhead bell crank mechanism, giving the aircraft genuinely useful short-field performance for something this light. Flight controls are full 3-axis, not the weight shift or 2-axis systems common on many ultralights, actuated through a control wheel mounted on a column running to the surfaces via flexible push-pull cables with conventional rudder pedals also steering the nose wheel. The landing gear is tricycle configuration, with sprung tube suspension absorbing the shock of rough field landings, and, in a small detail that says a lot about the aircraft's balance, a fourth caster wheel under the tail, because with no pilot in the seat, the Aerolite's empty center of gravity is far enough aft that the aircraft simply rests on its tail. Then there's the brake system. Aerolite advertised drum brakes on the main wheels from the beginning, at a time when most Part 103 Ultralights had no brakes at all, because brakes meant extra weight that many designs simply could not afford. The standard engine to keep the aircraft legally within Part 103 is a Hirth F-33, a 28-horsepower, single-cylinder, two-stroke. With that engine and a pilot of about 180 pounds, the Aerolite gets airborne in roughly 150 feet, climbs at 500 to 600 feet per minute, cruises around 55 miles per hour, and stalls, with flaps extended, at just 25 to 26 miles per hour. Buyers who want more power can step up to a Hirth F-23, an MZ-201 or 202, or a Rotax package. But the moment you install a heavier or more powerful engine, the aircraft can exceed the Part 103 weight limit. At that point, it stops being a legal ultralight and becomes an experimental amateur-built aircraft, which changes the regulatory picture entirely. Registration, N numbers, and depending on the state, pilot certification requirements all come back into play. That distinction, legal ultralight versus experimental amateur built, turns out to matter enormously when we look at how these aircraft actually fail in service.
Los Lunas, New Mexico. When simplicity meets fuel management. On June 9, 2009, a home-built Aerolite 103, registered N43598, departed near Los Lunas, New Mexico. The aircraft was fitted with a Rotax 503, a 50-horsepower, two-cylinder, two-stroke, well beyond the Hirth F-33's power output, and part of why this particular aircraft was registered as an experimental amateur built, rather than flown as an unregistered ultralight. During the flight, the engine lost power entirely. The pilot, a sports certificate holder, was forced into an emergency descent and collision with terrain during the forced landing. He survived with serious injuries, and the aircraft was substantially damaged. The National Transportation Safety Board's investigation, filed under case number CEN 09LA345, determined the cause with unusual precision: fuel starvation, caused by the pilot's mismanagement of the fuel system, specifically incorrect use of the fuel selector and shutoff valve. This was not a mechanical failure. The airframe had accumulated 427 flight hours and had passed its annual inspection 5 months earlier. The engine was mechanically sound. The failure was entirely procedural. A reminder that even the simplest possible aircraft still requires disciplined systems management from the person flying it. Immokalee, Florida. A hidden failure in the ignition system. Nearly 4 years later, on March 16, 2013, another Aerolite 103, registered N2549W, was descending toward its destination airport near Immokalee, Florida. The pilot leveled off around 1,000 feet above ground level after a descent from 3,000 feet, when the aircraft encountered heavy turbulence and a strong wind gust. The aircraft began to sink. The pilot applied power in an attempt to climb back out of the descent. The airplane did not respond. It failed to climb. A second wind gust rolled the aircraft to the right, and the pilot lost control. The Aerolite collided with trees. The pilot survived with serious injuries. At first glance, this looked like a simple case of turbulence overwhelming a lightweight airframe, plausible given how little an ultralight weighs relative to the forces a strong gust can generate. But the NTSB's investigation, case number ERA 131LA171, dug deeper into why the engine failed to deliver the power the pilot commanded.
Investigators found seizure marks on both the intake and exhaust side of the magneto's cylinder walls. The magneto, the component responsible for generating the spark that ignites the engine, had partially seized. The safety board's final determination was that the loss of engine power caused by that magneto piston seizure directly contributed to the aircraft's inability to climb out of the gust-induced descent. In other words, the pilot did everything an instructor would recommend, added power to counter a sudden loss of altitude, and the airplane simply couldn't deliver it.
What the pattern tells us. Look across these cases together, and a picture emerges that has nothing to do with bad luck and everything to do with the physics of building an airplane to weigh less than 254 pounds. Every gram removed from the airframe to stay legal under Part 103 is a gram of structural margin, of engine redundancy, of stall buffer that isn't there when something goes wrong. The Hearth F-33 that keeps the Aerolite 103 legally an ultralight is a single-cylinder engine with no redundancy. If it stops, there is no second cylinder to keep producing partial thrust. The airframe's light weight that gives it a 150-foot takeoff roll is the same lightweight that makes it exceptionally vulnerable to gusts on final approach. And Part 103's regulatory freedom, no license, no medical, no mandatory training, means pilots can and do fly this aircraft with wildly varying levels of formal instruction. None of this makes the Aerolite 103 a poorly engineered aircraft. If anything, the accident record shows an airframe that is remarkably good at surviving the mistakes made around it. Pilots walked away from the fuel starvation event in New Mexico and the magneto failure in Florida. What it demonstrates instead is the fundamental trade-off built into every ultralight category aircraft since Part 103 was written in 1982. The freedom to fly with almost no regulatory oversight is bought with an airframe that has almost no margin for pilot error, mechanical surprise, or bad weather timing. The Aerolite 103 remains, by most measures, one of the most successful Part 103 ultralights ever built, award-winning at Oshkosh, still in production more than 25 years after its debut, with a fleet approaching 1,000 aircraft. But its accident record is a case study in exactly what that FAA exemption trades away for freedom. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe for more deep dives into the aircraft, the accidents, and the engineering decisions that define general aviation. And let me know in the comments which aircraft you want investigated next.